Hey guys, welcome back. Today I'm taking on the Warsong Revenant from Age of Sigmar Sylvaneth, but with a Grimdark twist. There's going to be no airbrush or oils or enamel washes required, just pure speed painting using a double slap chop technique inspired by YouTuber Don Ceratos, which involves heavy dry brushing, simple base coats, and contrast paints to build gritty, haunted textures fast. The goal was to create a version of this model that's darker, moodier, and honestly, I think it looks a lot better than the official Games Workshop scheme. So let's dive into it, and welcome to the Darkforge. And to start things off, I'm going to get the model primed in black. And for that, I use some Green Stuff World Matte Black Surface Primer. And as I mentioned in the intro, this is a really easy painting process. All you really need to know is how to dry brush and how to base coat. And the next step is the first dry brushing pass, which is probably the most important part of the process. And for that I'm going to be using Army Painter Company Grey, which is a nice light grey which is just off-white. And I'm going to be using a decently sized dry brush and just dipping it in a small amount of the grey paint, and then wiping some of the excess off onto a dry brush palette. And I'm not wiping all of the paint off, I'm just trying to get enough of the paint off so that it's not going to blob onto the model and is applying nice and smoothly. And I normally just test this on the back of my hand. And then I just dry brush this on to the entire model. And for the most part, I'm going to be using downward strokes, as by doing this, it's going to help deposit the paint on all of the upward facing surfaces, which is exactly what I'm looking for. And because the dry brush isn't actually going into any of the recesses, it's going to leave all these areas still in the dark black primer, which is again exactly what I'm looking for. And the idea here is I'm going to work my way around the model, hitting it with downward strokes as I mentioned where possible, and just taking my time going around the entire model. And I'm just going to keep building this up till it gets to a nice bright white colour. The first couple of passes will appear quite dark grey, but the more passes that you apply, the brighter it will get. So just keep doing it until you get a nice bright white colour. And as I mentioned before, it's absolutely fine to leave all of the recesses still in the black, as that's what you want. But it is important that you don't miss out any obvious sections of the model, and important that you hit every part of the model until you end up with something that looks a little bit like this, where all of the model has been hit by the white from all angles, and it's just all of the cracks and deepest of recesses that are still in the black primer. And this is going to create a really nice base for the upcoming contrast paints, and make the next steps nice and easy. And the next part of the process is to apply all of the contrast paints. I'm firstly going to be starting with some Vallejo Express Mummy White, and using this to base coat all of the skin. And the reason that I'm starting with the skin is that there is an awkward little gap in between a few strands of the model's hair, where a part of the face and nose is visible, And this will be a fairly awkward area to paint in without making a mess to the surrounding areas. So it's best to get that tackled first and get the rest of the skin done at the same time. Next I used Vallejo Express Lancer Grey to paint in the shrine type thingy that's on the back of the model. And from here on out I'm just going to be doing exactly the same thing with contrast paints, which is to apply a solid base coat to each area. And I'm not doing anything particularly special, I'm just using a fairly loaded brush and applying the contrast paints to the area and just allowing it to flow into all of the recesses. The only things to watch out for are to make sure that you don't apply too much contrast paint to the area and flood it and cause pooling to occur. But if you do this, you can just wick it up with a dry brush. And also try not to overly work any particular area. Just apply the contrast paint and allow it to flow in and do its thing, as if you overwork it you are going to get some ugly brush strokes. And the only other thing is to make sure that you cover absolutely every part of the white and don't even leave a speck of the white showing, as any white parts, even just a small speck, is going to stick out like a sore thumb and kind of ruin the paint job. So just be meticulous about it and make sure you cover everything. And for the rest of the colours I used Vallejo Express Willow Bark for all of the wooden areas, which would include all of the branches on the back of the model, all of the armour panels, and also the horn as well. And off camera I painted in the base of the model, just using a 50-50 mix of the previous two colours, which was Willow Bark and Lancer Grey, and this just gives a nice muddy ground look. I then used some Vallejo Express Battle Dress Brown to paint in the large bone that the model is standing on, and also used this to paint in the sword as well. And this Battle Dress Brown colour, which is a really nice light warm brown, along with the mummy white that I used for the skin, are slowly becoming some of my favourite contrast paints. I can see both of them having a lot of applications in my painting, especially in the near future. And once I'd finished up painting all of the bone, I then off camera painted in all of the vines, just using the same willow bark colour that I used for the rest of the wooden areas. And up until this point I have deliberately painted the model in with some browns, tans, ochres and dark greens, keeping the palette fairly muted and with similar tones, which is really going to help this next colour pop a little bit more, as I'm now going to add some colour to the model, using some Vallejo Express Deep Purple, and I'm going to mix this with some Vallejo Express Hospitalier Black, 2 parts of the purple to 1 part of the black, which is going to darken it up a little and give a really nice deep purple colour. And I'm pretty much going to apply this to all of the rest of the unpainted model, apart from the hair. And before I painted in the final egg on the top of the model, I decided to paint in the little critter first, And for that I used Vallejo Express Hospitalier Black, which should just give it a nice black base coat. And now that everything had been base coated, I decided that the skin tone wasn't quite dark enough, so I just quickly went in with some Army Painter Dark Tone and applied a coat of this over all of the skin, which will darken it up slightly and flow into all of the recesses and provide a little bit more contrast. And at this point, everything had been base coated to my satisfaction, and already the model is looking pretty good. But we're going to now push that a little bit further by applying the second slap chop layer. So to do this, it's back to the dry brush and the Army Painter Company Grey, and again dry brushing this onto the model. But this time it's going to be a lighter dry brush, and I'm just going to focus my attention more on all of the upward facing surfaces on the model. And at this point it is up to you how far you want to push this. You can actually just apply the grey highlights all over again, or be more selective and only re-highlight certain areas. And as I said, I'm going to be somewhere in between there, and I'm just going to focus on all of the upward facing surfaces. And by doing this, you might be inclined to think that you've just ruined the model, as it is definitely going to be looking a little bit messy, but we're going to fix that up shortly. And once the second dry brush coat had been applied, it was then time to apply the second layer of contrast paints. And the idea here is that you can apply a much brighter contrast paint than the previous base colour, which should give some really nice highlights that are blended in with the base colour. And for the purple highlight, I went for Vallejo Express Cardinal Purple, which is much more like a magenta, and just applied this to all of the white areas on top of the purple. Then I used Vallejo Express Mummy White, which was the same colour I used for the skin, and used this to highlight up the bone area the model is standing on. And then use some Vallejo Express Khaki Drill to highlight up all of the wooden areas. And again, that includes all of the branches coming out the back of the model, the horn, the armour, and also the vines as well. And now that most of the larger areas had been re-highlighted, it was just time to re-highlight up some of the smaller areas. Firstly, I highlighted up the little critter using a combination of Vallejo Express Omega Blue and Hospitalier Black, mixing these two parts of the blue to one part of the black, and just applying this over the critter, trying not to get it into the eyes, which I'll be painting up a little bit later. And for the hair, which I deliberately left in the grey dry brush, I'm going to go in with some Vallejo Express Black Lotus, which is a really nice light black with a blue tint to it. And this single coat over the grey dry brushed hair should give a really nice black to white transition. And to finish the model off, I just went in with some yellow contrast paint to paint in the eyes of the critter, and then just used the same omega blue and black mix to paint in the other egg beside the critter that is slightly popping out. And that was all parts of the model now complete. And there was no extra highlights or edge highlights placed. This simply was a dry brush layer, followed by a base coat layer, repeated twice. And for the basing, I decided to put the model on a slightly larger base, which then gave me a little bit more room to add in some withered trees which I had 3D printed. This is just a little bit of extra detail I wanted to add to the model and certainly isn't necessary. And I just painted them up in the same way I painted the wood on the model, and then applied some textured basing paste to the base, and that was the model now complete. And I have to say, I really enjoyed this process. It's such a simple technique, but really effective, and I highly recommend if you're watching this video that you give it a try yourself. It's so simple that you almost can't go wrong. But if you do have any questions about any of the techniques used in this video, feel free to leave a comment down below. I'm always happy to try and help out. And I think I'm going to be doing a lot more of this double slap chop technique myself in the future. I can already see all of the possibilities, and I'm really excited to try it out on some other models. But for now, a big thank you to all of my Patreons. As always, your support is much appreciated. And I hope you all enjoyed and found this video useful and give the technique a try for yourself. If you do, I don't think you'll be disappointed. But until next time, happy painting, and I'll see you in the next one.